Hello, everyone. This is George Ogorodnik with ZenTek Consultants here, and today we're going to talk about Blockify, a very neat tool for working with blocks in BricsCAD. So a few rules before we begin. Microphones are on mute for participants for this webinar, so that background noise does not interfere with the presentation. As with all of our presentations at ZenTek, we do take questions. Please feel free to type those questions in the chat dialog or the questions dialog in your GoToWebinar control panel. I'll make sure to get to those questions at the end of the webinar since we do have a limited time here. So I'll try to answer all the questions at the end. All right, let's get started. So for those of you that have not worked with us before, we are ZenTek Consultants, and we primarily work with the architecture, engineering, and construction, as well as manufacturing industries. And we provide technical training and software support for the various different softwares that are used in these industries. We do provide support and reselling support for BricsCAD, as well as we are certified Microsoft partners. So we do hope you go to our website and check out some of the other services that we have to offer. All right, with that being said, let's begin. So Blockify, what it does and what advantages it provides for working with blocks in BricsCAD. So for those of you that are familiar with AutoCAD or BricsCAD block structures, it's pretty it's pretty tedious to create block structures and place them on a drawing. And when the block structures get destroyed for whatever reason, if they get exploded or if somebody deletes or purges the blocks out of your drawing, it can be extremely difficult to recreate those blocks. So as most of you probably know, when you create a blocks, all you're doing is you're combining a bunch of objects into a single grouping, which you can then insert as a unified group. And to undo that, a lot of times people can go into the drawing and explode those blocks. And as a result, to undo that exploded block and turn it back into a block, what you have to do is you have to reinsert that block, or in some cases redefine the block, and then delete the objects and replace them with the block in the proper orientation with the correct scale. So that's one of the major problems with working with blocks. It takes time to make a block, and it's very easy to remove a block. So the other issue that we're dealing with when working with blocks is it takes a lot of steps to create a block. So for those of you that have worked with AutoCAD or with BricsCAD, the traditional method of creating blocks takes usually at least 3 steps. You have to draw the block, you have to select the objects that are going to be part of your block, you have to name it, and you have to choose a base point or the insertion point of the block. So that takes several steps, and then usually after that you have to go and place the block in your drawing, because for most of you, you're creating blocks because you're going to have multiple instances of a set of objects. So you'd have to manually go in and place all of those blocks. So that takes at least a couple of steps. So Blockify solves most of these problems. So what is Blockify? Blockify is an intelligent command within BricsCAD. It's one of those commands with the little lightning symbol attached to it, which lets you know that it's it allows powerful manipulation of block structures. So one of the things that you can do with Blockify is you can draw your objects, your repeated objects, before creating the block structure. So you can make copies of your object, place it in the various different orientations, and then use Blockify to turn every single instance of those objects into blocks. So that's one of the uses of Blockify. Another use is to essentially undo the the main issue with blocks, where someone goes in and explodes the blocks, and now you have to manually redraw and recreate them. So Blockify does that all in one step. It recreates the blocks that got exploded, or it redefines them in the drawing structure. And BricsCAD went a step further with this Blockify tool. Not only can it recreate and redefine blocks, it can also detect patterns in your block structures, and it turns them into array structures, such as polar arrays, rectangular arrays, any sort of grid-like structure that BricsCAD detects in your objects that you're trying to Blockify. It's going to turn them into one of BricsCAD associative arrays. So that's an additional step that you would have to take if you were doing this manually. You'd have to create the block, you'd have to place copies of the block, and then you'd have to use the array command manually. In this case, if the blocks are already in place, if the array is already in place, Blockify can just pick up on it. So let me demonstrate all of the stuff that I just talked about. So here we have in BricsCAD, we have a sample floor plan diagram. This is from AutoCAD, and some of you might be familiar with this, as we do use it in some of our demonstrations and trainings. So this is a modified version of the floor plan diagram. So as you can see, there's line structures, there's different layers, and there's blocks already defined. So if I go into my drawing explorer, you can see that we do have blocks defined for different repeated objects in this floor plan. Also, what you might notice is we have repetitive blocks or repetitive objects in here that are not blocks. So these are file cabinets. These are not blocks. These are just lines and collections of objects that have not been turned into blocks yet. So as I said before, to turn these into blocks, you would have to select these, run the block command, define a name, select the entities, select the base point, and all that would do is that would turn this one specific instance of that block into a block at most. And then you would have to manually do that to every single one of those block instances. So with Blockify, it's much, much simpler than that. So let's come over here to this instance of this. Actually, we'll start with the doors here. So we have several doors on this floor plan, and none of them are blocks. So I'll use Blockify to turn these doors into block objects. So Blockify is right here inside of your blocks tool set under the home or the insert ribbon panel. You can also call it from the command line by typing in Blockify, just like with any other command. So let's Blockify these doors. And here's how it's done. It asks for input entities. You want to go ahead and select the entities that are going to be part of this block. So now we have the door entities selected. And then it asks, do you want to search, where do you want to search for duplicates of this object to turn into blocks? And usually you want to do the entire drawing, that's the default option, or if you want to search in a specific area, you can define a specific area with a window. So for today, we're just gonna use the entire drawing. And this is where you define the base point, the same way that you would define it with the regular block command. In here, it's just the next step. So I'm going to pick a base point. Then it asks for a name. This is where we name it. Just call it door. And there you go. As you can see, every single instance of that door appearing in this floor plan has now been turned into a block. And in our drawing explorer, we can now see the door as a block that's been added to the drawing. And notice how it only turned this version of the left-hand door. it didn't turn the right-hand door into a block. That's because this is a mirror image, and it did not detect this as the same structure, the same group of objects. So that's how you can create a block from groups of objects that don't exist as blocks on your drawing. So what about objects that have been exploded? So I'm gonna do one of the things that you should never do when working with CAD drawings. I'm just gonna go ahead, select the entire drawing, and I'm gonna explode the entire thing. So as you can see, all of our blocks, our chairs, our computers, our phones are now back to being primitives. So this entire drawing has been exploded back into primitives. But for those of you that know how the explode command works, notice that my block structure is still in place in our drawing explorer. So I can still insert blocks and it'll make them as blocks. But these blocks are no longer blocks. They're exploded versions of the blocks. So they only contain the lines and the primitive objects used to make up those blocks. So how do I bring all of those blocks back? Very easily with the Blockify command. And for this, I don't even have to select anything. Just gonna run Blockify. And instead of selecting input entities, I'm gonna go with the default option, find all groups. I'm just gonna keep hitting enter. And it reinserted all of my blocks. So not only does Blockify look in the drawing to find other objects that look similar to the one that you've selected and make a block definition, it also looks into your drawing explorer where your blocks are saved, and it compares the objects in the drawing to the objects that are already defined as blocks. And you saw how that only took a second. I just had to run the command and use the default options, and now I have all of my blocks as blocks instead of as primitive objects. So let's talk about the array option. So we have these filing cabinets here, and as you can see, some of these filing cabinets are arranged in a pattern. So these are the same spacing horizontally and the same spacing vertically in these cubicles. So we want to turn these into arrays, not just blocks, but we want to make these associative arrays. So when I run my Blockify command, I just need to change those settings. So this takes me to my settings, and I just use replace patterns by arrays. So let's go ahead and select our objects, find all groups, search entire drawing. And because this is not a block and this doesn't have a definition, it's going to ask for insertion point and the name. So we'll define a name, filing cabinet. And notice how it says we have 11 block inserts. That's 11 instances of this object. And we also have 2 array inserts. And notice over here in our drawing explorer, we have 2 array structures that appear. And as you can see, it picks up this structure and turns it into an array. And I can go ahead and I can edit its parameters just like I can do with any other array. So that's how arrays work. So now let's talk about the worst case scenario and how Blockify can save you from it. So I'm just going to go and I'm going to change my settings back to no arrays. So I'm going to go into settings, undo my my patterns. And now say this drawing falls into the hands of somebody that doesn't know anything about drafting, and they don't know anything about blocks, so they just decide to go and explode all of these blocks, just like we did before. So now everything's exploded. We have no arrays. Actually, we do have these arrays. I just have to explode them. Because in BricsCAD, the explode command explodes it to the next lowest level. So what we had as arrays got exploded into blocks. So now you just have to explode it again to explode it back into its primitive objects. So we'll do that again. So now our arrays that were blocks are now back to being primitive objects. So say this person doesn't know anything about blocks and they just go around exploding this drawing willy-nilly. and say they go a step further and they decide to purge out all of these blocks from our drawing. So now not only do we not have blocks in the drawing, we don't have any block definitions. And to make matters worse, I'm gonna do this one step further, and I'm gonna save this drawing, and I'm gonna close it and reopen it. So now we have, looks like I opened the different version of this file. Hold on, let me see if I can find the. Sorry about that. Looks like I closed the file and I forgot which one I closed. Yeah, this is the original version of this file. Yeah, sorry about that. We'll try to go from here. So I'll do the same thing that I did before. I'm gonna go ahead and I'm gonna explode the entire file, and I'm gonna purge out all of my blocks. This won't let me purge out all of them because they didn't all get exploded. But in any case, I'll try to purge out as much as I can. So the reason I'm showing you this is when you purge out these blocks, you now have to recreate the block definitions. And when you save this drawing, you can no longer use the undo button to bring back to undo the purge and the explode commands. So now that we have all of these blocks as primitives, you can really quickly use Blockify to bring them back. So again, Blockify, I'm gonna select my objects, find all groups, search entire drawing. We'll select our insertion point. We'll give it a name. And now we have our chair blocks back. And you can do the same thing with all of our other blocks, such as these computer blocks, these keyboard blocks, all of these blocks that got purged out. I can use Blockify to bring them back. All right, so looks like we did get a question. Question from Jonathan. Jonathan asks, does this work for annotative blocks? And the answer for that is yes, it does, under one condition. The annotative blocks have to be in the same annotative scale as the objects that you're trying to blockify. So let me demonstrate what I mean. So let's blockify this phone once again. Let's see, looks like it's, let me see, I just want to make sure it's already. We'll use the chair since we just blockified it. So I'm going to take a copy of this chair. I'm going to put it up here. And I'll make another copy of it. So we'll go and make the chair block annotative. So now the chair block is annotative, and I'll go ahead and explode this instance of it. So this is now a set of primitive objects, and this is now an annotative chair block. So I can go ahead and I can blockify this object and turn it into the chair block, and it'll become an annotative chair block just like this one. So here, we'll blockify it. And now this is an annotative chair block, and I can change my annotation scale, and both of these will resize the same way. I just got to set my auto scale to on, and now I can resize these blocks. Yep, and there you go. The annotative scale changes. Let's see, what did I have it set to? I think I had it set to 1/8. All right, let's undo, go back to the original scale. So this is where Blockify doesn't work. So if I go back and I explode this object, and then I change my annotation scale, and I try to blockify this object to match the annotation scale, to turn it into a block and resize it to this object, Blockify will no longer let me. So as you can see, it says no repeated geometry found. So this object is no longer able to be blockified because it's looking for a chair of this shape and this size, and it doesn't match my annotative objects that I've resized using the annotation scale. All right, so I hope that answered your question, Jonathan. All right, so that wraps up this presentation. Looks like we didn't get any more questions. So I did mention in the beginning, apart from BricsCAD, we also provide support and services and training for other software used in the AEC and manufacturing industries. So we do a lot of work with Bluebeam as well as Microsoft programs. Also, we provide support and training for Autodesk products such as AutoCAD and Inventor. And for those of you that have any questions or would like to inquire about some of our services, please feel free to reach out to us. Again, our website is ZenTekConsultants.net, or you can also call our sales number or email over here. And once again, I hope you all enjoyed this presentation, and I hope you enjoy the rest of your day.